Please welcome to the Gartner virtual stage, Distinguished Vice President Analyst and Gartner Fellow, Gartner Research and Advisory, Daryl Plummer.
Hello. Welcome to the Application, Innovation, and Business Solutions Summit. I'm Daryl Plummer, and I'll be taking you through our keynote this morning, which is delivering resilience through a composability fitness routine. Have you ever wondered what most successful people have in common? Well, the answer is simple. They all have a philosophy. They have a philosophy. Whether you're talking about Elon Musk or Steve Jobs or someone like Stacey Abrams, they have a philosophy of how to build success. And you can build a philosophy as well. Why would we need a philosophy today? Well, because we need to build success. The ancient philosopher Socrates once said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Now, what he meant by that was that we tend to do things over and over again, and the sum total of what we do, our behavior, defines what we are. It defines what we mean in the context of the world. And in this world, we really need to define it well, because things change quickly. They change so fast that all of a sudden, our entire lives can be overturned. For example, in 2019, some 365 million workers in US-based offices, the number is much larger across the entire globe, use computers at their desks every day. And then in 2020, we sent almost everybody home. Now that was a disruption that we all felt, that we all had to live with, and it was something that forced us to change. Our behaviors changed, and our approaches to everything had to be rethought. Now this is an important thing for us, because when you start thinking about the fact that we're all now working from home, we had to figure out new ways to compose a solution to that problem. And the reality is that change is going to continue to happen like that. That kind of change won't slow down. But just managing the change isn't what we need to do. In fact, we need to do something completely different. And that is to build resilience. Resilience is something that allows us to weather the storm, that allows us to get through disruptions no matter when they happen, whether we expected them or we didn't. And in fact, resilience, if you look at the definition of it, it's about two different things. First, resilience is about being able to recover quickly, to get back to a place where you can start again, but not starting from where you were before, because in fact, the world has changed in that time. It is the ability to bounce back, yes, but it is also the ability to bounce forward, to recover enough so that you can chart a new path and get to a new place. Resilience is something that we all are familiar with in many different ways in our lives. We just need to figure out how to apply it in our business and with our technology. First, let's take a look at something that's extremely resilient that we all understand, the human form. The human form is one of the most resilient things that we have available to us. It is flexible, it is adaptable, and it's agile. It's flexible because it can bend into any shape that we think we might need. It's adaptable because it can be trained. It can learn new ways of doing things. And that brings agility, the ability to stop and start, go in different directions all the time. The human body is a miracle. And that miracle is what allows us to be resilient. But it's also not just the physical part. The human body is also about a mental aspect. It is about being aware of what we need to change. Pay attention to your body. It'll tell you what you should change about your lifestyle. It is about being willing to make those changes when you need to make them. And it is about being persistent in making those changes. So if we can do this with the human body, we have to realize that we can do it with other things as well. Your role now is to establish and maintain enterprise resilience. Just like you want to maintain resilience in your body, you want to maintain it within your entire enterprise. And that's a great role to have, because it means that now you get to retrain everything. Just as the human body is a complex organism, an organization is also a complex organism. And that organism can be trained. The human body can be trained through fitness to build greater health. And an organization can be trained through composition to build greater resilience. In the end, it builds a philosophy that we can rely on, one that says to us that composition is to resilience as fitness is to health. That's our philosophy. That's where we're talking about building this thing. I built kind of a philosophy of fitness myself. Like many people, I had a lot of time under my hands during the pandemic, locked at home, and I started the fitness routines. Now, trust me, I've got a long, long way to go. But the reality is that I can already see differences that have been brought about. I can see different parts of my life that are changing because of this new routine. And the same thing has to happen within an organization. So when you use a composition routine, you realize that everything is composable. You start thinking everything can be composed from applications, which can be composed from modular pieces of software that can be tied together and orchestrated through APIs and with processes and workflows that can be made into solutions that are changeable for the time. And that's a very good thing because it's not just applications. It's architecture. It's our culture. Our culture of thinking will shift to composable thinking. Our ability to create partnerships, our entire business, in fact, will be composable if we let it. And this is really the place where we'll begin to develop new innovation. Innovation will come from our ability to change to fit the new value scenarios that emerge. When we see something new that needs to be done, something that maybe we've never been able to do before, we'll be able to bend or train something new to fit it. This is the key behind the notion of a composability fitness routine. So if you look at some examples, some simple examples of what have happened recently, we have to remember something. These changes are not just about the pandemic. I'm sure, just like me, you're sick of hearing about the pandemic. But the reality is that change has been getting much more frequent since the late 80s. And it was going to get more frequent as technology changed. We're in for a decade of radical technology innovation. And those changes that are brought about, those new value scenarios that digital giants tend to own, are something that we will all learn from. If you look at a simple area, fitness gyms. You know, if you belong to a gym, you probably knew that in the last year, a lot of them closed their doors because people couldn't go to the gym. They were locked out. 60% of them never came back. And in fact, we had many businesses affected that way. 13 major retailers had to close their doors for a time. And we're looking at a situation where if you're going to be flexible, adaptable, and agile, you've got to be willing to change. And the resilience that was built by gyms was they shifted over to Zoom classes, Zoom training classes. Now, you could do virtual classes and you could still get your exercise. They also shifted to mental health classes, helping people to stay mentally fit while they couldn't come to the gym. They started cleaning the gyms more regularly and rigorously, and they instituted social distancing across everything they did. So for those customers that came back, they could feel a confidence, a trust that this gym was going to be good for them. We could also go to China, Wuhan, China, in fact, a place where the pandemic mattered quite a bit. And you'll find that there was a retailer there that had to decide, do we close our doors or do we keep working through this pandemic? What they did is they decided to retrain their entire sales force to become online streaming hosts, to host sales events, to host activities with customers that allowed them to engage and actually acquire product. This allowed them to reduce the number of layoffs that they had, and they had no downtime, no closing. So we can be resilient. They had to be aware of what would work, aware of what training was necessary, and willing to actually make the investment in retraining all their staff to get there. They persisted, and that gave them success. So when we talk about these things, we're really talking about the idea that composition brings something important to us. It brings a path to resilience that we can build on. Composition brings more awareness to the organization, discovering what you need when you need it. That is discovery. Composition brings greater flexibility through modularity. Now, we've thought about modularity for a long time, and we've talked about it, but modularity now, those black box pieces that fit together in any way we want, the Lego pieces, if you will, can be used to build many things, but then they have to be orchestrated. We have to have the flow of their function. What happens first? What happens next? Under what conditions? To orchestrate these things in sometimes real time. And lastly, they have to be autonomous, because composition brings willingness through autonomy. It brings the ability for us to say, look, each of these modular pieces are not just pieces. They can actually work independently of one another in an autonomous fashion and not interfere with one another. Then you connect them together through the orchestrations, the exchange of information and data, and you get a composed result. Now, there's a company that represents one of the best examples of composable business that I've seen, and that is Haier. It is an Asian white goods manufacturer, appliances. They offer a great deal of services around how you get these appliances, what the customers want, and the like. Now, Haier has gone out and built modular enterprise elements. They created what they call micro enterprises. They were modular and they were autonomous because they could work independently and they could be plugged into different scenarios as needed. They didn't interfere with one another in a negative way, and they had to communicate. They had to be orchestrated through a mechanism they call the jellyfish model. The jellyfish is an animal doesn't have a central nervous system. It actually communicates out to through all the tentacles, the information needed for the entity to work. And they use a similar mechanism. They call it the jellyfish model. They communicate out to each of these micro enterprises as needed to get the job done. That's an orchestration through an interesting way of communication. So Hire was creating something that allowed them to compete better, that allowed them to change faster and to be resilient in times when they had to make a shift, such as if their supply chain changed because of tariffs, or if their replenishment strategies had to move faster to actually make up for a missing equipment that they couldn't get. So these are things that they did well, and you can do them as well. When we're thinking about a philosophy around composition, we have to remember that mindset matters. And this was the name of a book written by a fitness guru named Brian Grasso. Brian said, a mindset is just stories you tell about yourself to yourself. And this is an important thing. Now, I have a personal trainer. Many of you may have a personal trainer, and you know that they are very good at torturing us and keeping us doing what we need to do. And he's always telling me, you got to be in the right mindset. You got to be positive. You got to believe you can do it. And if you believe it, that's more than half the battle. And the same thing is true here when we're talking about composition. You know, it's interesting because we have been talking about modularity and we've been talking about APIs and we've been talking about integration for decades. And now here comes composition and people go, well, it's so different. Why? I don't understand it. We've been doing that already. Well, we haven't. We haven't. What we've been doing is modularity. Composition requires us to believe that we're able to structure an entire solution from composable pieces orchestrated together and that are autonomously able to do their jobs. So when we think about this, we have to actually shift our mindset. That's the first thing to do. The struggle we have in our minds is that we have an inability to believe that this is something different. An inability to believe that when a business goes through, like Hire, goes through changes, that they're actually doing composition. Well, they are. Even if you don't think it is, because all you're thinking about is an application and code, it is still composition to be used to an advantage. The second thing is we have an inability to establish a discipline around composition. If you don't have discipline, you really won't build consistent success. So you need to build a discipline. And the third thing, every discipline needs to be built on a strong foundation. We don't have a strong foundation for composition because we have many tools, we have many platforms, we have many services and capabilities that are not designed to be composable today. We have many that are heritage systems that are around, and we even have people who still love writing code. So these are things that we need to get past, and our mindset has to be shifted in order to help us do it. So the first thing to do is support your philosophy through composition, and there are three ways in which you can look at this. First, building belief. You got to build in belief. And secondly, you have to go into discipline. And third, build that strong foundation. So the three things that I mentioned that we have an inability to deal with are the three very things that we have to do right. So let's start with belief. Well, belief in my world actually is about trust, thinking, and habits. If you trust something, you're willing to try things with it that you might not otherwise try. If you have the right thinking around it, then you can actually keep yourself focused on the right things at the right time. And if you build the right habits, doing the right thing will lead to the right results. So the idea of these three things coming together to build out belief is something that we all can benefit from. Right now, we've got to trust that these systems will work. We got to trust that they're not going to fall apart as soon as we build them. We have to be thinking all the time about what can I compose? How will that composition happen? What do I need to discover in order to make it valid and real? And we need to break the habits. Now, I was told once that human beings are creatures of habit. We do the same things over and over again. And the example that he used was that when you get in the shower, you probably start washing yourself in the same spot every last time. Now, think about that the next time you're in the shower. It'll drive you insane. If you really are a creature of habit, you will do that. And trying to break the habit is hard. So let's build the right habits. Let's build composability. Now I'm talking about things like reuse patterns. I'm talking about things like getting developers not to rebuild something when they could go out and actually use something that's already there. When you find a moment you need to compose something, are you going to reach for that code editor? Or are you going to go into a marketplace to search for something? If you're honest with yourself, you're probably reaching for code more than you are the marketplace. So these habits will build belief for us. It can get us into a place where if we believe it, we can do it. Flex Factory, an example. In manufacturing, Flex Factory has actually brought together a number of organizations in partnership. Companies like Porsche work together, and they use all of their own composable capabilities to share the ability to get manufacturing done. They're able to bring together a lot of different aspects from each company. They have a flexible production concepts that are working together. They build out a digital value chain where each link in the chain is adding some value that the other companies in the chain do not have. And they're composing the solution by working together through prearranged agreements and contracts that allow them to share capabilities, to share products, to share technology, and to share customers. This allows them to break barriers down. Now, the barriers that begin to fall, first, the culture and mindset begin to change. Because the barrier of a bad mindset or a bad culture will stop almost any initiative from happening. So they break it down by forcing themselves to think in sharing terms. What do we need to share? What do we need to get from someone else as opposed to doing it ourselves? Second barrier is they unblock the creation and usage of capabilities. They don't stop people from using something just because it came from a different place than they might have thought it would come from. They reach out and use it. No matter who's in the ecosystem, they're willing to actually exchange. The third thing is they support continuous change. They don't believe that this is going to be done once and stop. It's going to continue to happen. We've been building applications for a long time where we think once the app is done and we deliver it, we're done. That's not the way the world should work. We have to actually continue to really challenge ourselves and make changes all the time. And lastly, they redefine their company structure. The structure is now about the collaborative. It is about all these companies working together, not just about the hierarchy of one entity. So if they can do it, we all can do it, as long as we're willing to believe and to actually work on that belief. The second thing that you have to do in these disciplines that I talk about is you want to build a high composability metabolism. Now, this is interesting because, again, personal trainers are always telling you, you got to do a bunch of squats. I'm like, why do I have to do squats? My leg are the strongest things around. They go, it's because, you have to build those big muscles, activate those muscles. Once you activate the big muscles, they actually burn energy when you're sitting still. That's a part of raising your metabolism. So you have to ask yourself, what are the muscles that you're going to activate in your company that are going to burn energy even when you're resting? And this idea leads us to some things that we can do. First, fusion teams. Focus a lot of energy on fusion teams. Now, I've talked a lot about business, and I've talked a lot about the technology behind it, not in detail, but certainly the notion of the two things are enough that we have to bring them together. We have to fuse them into a new element where we bring business and IT function together, because business can't do it alone and IT can't do it alone. So we need to fuse them and build out teams that are sensitive to both sides of the equation. Now, these teams are usually led by a business individual more often than a technology person, but that's a good thing because now we're closer to the outcomes. But what are the technology issues we should focus on? First, composable experience. Composable experience is when we actually allow the user, the customer, to compose an experience, or we can compose the experience for them through technologies that let us change easily. And I'm going to give you a way of thinking about this. Now, if you have a smartphone, a modern smartphone today, now, if you're one of those people who still have an old flip phone or an old BlackBerry, then you're not who I'm talking to. But for everybody else, we're talking about smartphones where if you want a new function, you can download it from the App Store. You can compose your experience. You can increase your ability for that phone to do things, training it in essence, to add a new skill. And you can build out an experience that's more satisfactory to you. When customers can do that with any environment, where they can personalize, hyper-personalization, where they can actually begin to use different channels for access. So they are able to compose an experience that's best for them. That's a muscle that you have to exercise. A second one is the democratization of IT. Democratization of IT. This is when you allow non-technical people to do what was formerly considered a technical role. How are you going to do that? Because now the tools are getting easy enough for them to use without technical training. Yes, I'm talking about low code, no code. I'm talking about tools that you give to the business side so that they can build their own solutions. Now, I'm going to explain why that doesn't lead to chaos. And the reason why is because the tools are tied now through cloud services back to the IT department. Working together, they're using APIs, services, data that is curated by the IT department, but fed through these low-code tools. They can now build the solutions because in the end, supply and demand is always a problem for IT organizations, especially app groups, because the supply almost never meets the demand. Now, if they can do the work themselves, they can build their own supply when they need it. Throw it away if they're done when they're done with it, and it's easy enough to build another one just in time to get more value. So it changes the economics of the whole equation, and fusion teams help you manage that to keep the chaos at a minimum, to keep everyone safe and working steadily. Speaking of chaos, however, the third muscle you have to actually exercise and activate is a muscle around managing chaos. Chaos engineering, a discipline we should all be thinking about, because agile systems can be very fragile. They can be very complex, many moving parts. If you've ever built like a Lego Star Wars Death Star or a Millennium Falcon or something, you know all the hundreds of pieces you've got to put together. You lose one and you're in trouble. You got to figure out how to get a workaround going. Same thing is true with composable anything. A lot of moving parts. And we don't know what's likely to go wrong because it's not going to be always deterministic in the way we're used to it in algorithmic programming. So chaos engineering lets us test for the unexpected failures, for the failure through complexity that will be brought about. That discipline will build reliability and build trust to support the belief that we can do this well. So 3 muscles for you to exercise. Those 3 muscles are going to really, really raise your metabolism and get you to a new place. Now, let me add some more things that you can think about doing. A couple of principles you should have on your mind. One is the principle of specificity. Again, I'm talking about trainers and fitness routines. Specificity is a principle that can be used quite effectively. Another principle is rest and recovery. Let's talk about each one. The principle of specificity says, tailor your exercises to fit your goal. Now, if you're out there and you want to lose weight and you go pumping iron, pumping heavy weights, you're not going to lose a lot of weight. You're going to gain mass. You're going to gain muscle. If you want to lose weight, you have to lift repeatedly lighter amounts of weight. So if you're doing one thing, but you're trying to get the goal of the other, you're unlikely to be successful. Tailor to the goal that you're trying to actually meet. In business and in technology, that means focus on one thing at a time. Essentially, it means center on the thing you're trying to get done, not some grandiose vision of everything being composable all the time. Everything can be, but it can't get there overnight. You have to pick something to actually work on. And then once that thing is picked, you'll be able to actually solve problems that extend your ability to use your skills in a new environment or a new scenario. So this is the kind of thing that FedEx did. Now, FedEx found what we call a moment of composability when they realized that they wanted to actually go with these FedEx on-site stores, embedded inside other stores. They had embedded delivery. And they used apps, to actually allow people to work with those stores. And they had to build out a microservices-based architecture to support both iOS and Android apps. So they got a lot of flexibility that way. And they had to extend the partnership. They used these dojos to actually train their people. Train them in thinking about composition, train them in thinking about partnering, train them in thinking about how to actually build out flexible solutions. And those dojos were able to be extended as a part of their strategy. They thought it through to get these on-site stores running. And the partnership now yields great results because they were flexible, they were adaptable, they were willing, and they were aware of what they needed to change. This was a moment of composability. We can all find them. We all have those moments in our lives, when you realize, I got a kid going to college and I haven't saved up any money. What do you do now? Right? You got to compose a solution. Compose yourself. Same thing is true with our applications, our business, and our architectures. The second principle is the principle of rest and recovery. Rest and recovery. Again, trainers will tell you, your body's got to rest. It's got to recover. That's why I always say you got to get a good night's sleep. You got to work hard and then stop. They always tell you, we're going to go for 30 seconds and then we're going to stop for 10 seconds. And then we're going to go for 45 seconds and then we'll stop for 5 seconds. They give you time to rest because the body has to recover. And if it does recover, it can do greater things. The body's going to tend to respond to whatever demand we place on it. But if you place too much, it shuts down. Because if you don't let it rest, fatigue sets in. Same thing is true in your composition efforts. When you think about this, you're really needing to do some things in there that your body needs to work on while you're not working. So rest doesn't mean do nothing. The body is doing something. It's recovering. It's preparing you for the next round. And you can do the same thing. Take stock. while at rest. Look at what you're doing. Who's using what? How much reuse are you getting? What modules are the most effective and why? Start planning as well. Take stock and then plan for the next round. Plan for the changes that need to be made. If the people don't have the modules they need, they're not going to look for them. They're going to try to build new ones. So you won't get reuse. You won't get any kind of consistent use of modularity. And certainly your composability will suffer. So let your organization rest and plan for how to make it better the next time. Don't just rest on your laurels. Don't just say, hey, we did it. We built this app. We're great. No, you got to be planning for what's the next round. These principles can get you a long way if you follow them a lot. So that was discipline. But what about that strong foundation? Well, you've got to have a strong base of technologies. You got to have a strong, like I said, the squats are so your legs are strong. You also got to build a strong core. Your ab work, your back work are all building a strong core, because when they're strong, everything else is easier to do. So building the strong foundation for an enterprise is really about having the right composable technologies available to it. The composable technologies that we would focus on are many and a variety of things. I'm going to give you three. First, automation. Everything from simple automation to hyper automation. You've got to be able to automate your way into consistency, greater quality, and repeatability. That brings speed. It brings safe speed. So automation is a key thing that you're going to do, along with the composable architecture. The composable architecture is one that's designed around using platforms, using services that are inherently modular, that inherently are able to share capabilities from different places at different times. The notion of being able to build out what we used to call a service-oriented architecture is embedded in the idea of a composable architecture, because you're going to use services as your major component of assembly, like the Lego blocks. Okay? You have to figure out the granularity of them, and you have to then figure out who's using what and give them a path to being able to understand how to evolve these things. And then there's third, prepackaged business capabilities. This notion of being able to go and find something that someone else already started, instead of starting at the beginning yourself, is a very powerful one. It extends from just the services, the microservices you might use, all the way out to an entire ecosystem for a supply chain or for a manufacturing group. Because when you say you're going to depend on others, you build a camaraderie that doesn't normally exist. Now, I've been a developer since I was 13 years old. And I believe that I'm the best developer that ever walked the face of the earth. Any decent developer will say that. It's almost never true. But the fact is, if you believe it, you're going to tend to rely on your skills. And we have to train developers to say, no, I'm going to rely on the person sitting next to me. She's got as good a skill set as I do. And I'm going to use her code. I'm going to use her modules. And we'll pass that up the chain all the way to the business executives to prearrange the agreements and the necessary, the necessary sharing that we can build an economy around. So an economy of composition really relies on these things, and these are things that will build that foundation for you and make it so that you can repeat it all the time. We need to build repeatability, and composition supports that, because composition is a practice that must be practiced. You have to do it as often as you can. And the reason why is because if you don't use it, you will lose it. Again, in fitness, muscles build strength with use, and composition can build strength with use as well. Without it, it will atrophy. Think about it for a moment. You go out and you want to do a composition. Usually it's in an unexpected time when you need to change something quickly. If you haven't been practicing this, then you will not be ready to make the change. I've been in martial arts a long time, and I always say, you fight the way you practice. If you're not fighting regularly, training and practicing that way, then you're probably not going to react that way when it's time to do it. So use it or lose it. Don't let your composition skills atrophy, because you have to do it as a part of your behavior pattern. Remember, we're talking about behavior here. Socrates said, excellence then is not an act, but a habit. A habit is the heart of behavior. And behavior is what we're really trying to get you to change, not just building a composable application, not just building a composable technology solution, but using the right behaviors to actually build out composability in everything that you do. Everything is composable, and you can train yourself to use it effectively. So in the end, you have to think about what you can do practically. I'm giving you a number of things to think about. They translate into practical things that you can do anytime. First, let's look at this one. Evangelize composition. Evangelize composability overall. Why? because evangelism draws crowds. Crowds can be inspired. Inspiration leads to belief. Belief connotes faith. And with faith, we can work miracles. Now, that sounds like a lot of talk, but the reality is that belief is the first step to success. Any successful person will tell you that. And you need to evangelize the belief and lead to that success. The second thing that you can do is promote those good habits. Start thinking about watching what your people do. Who reaches for the code editor first? That's the person that needs to be helped to reach for the marketplace portal. Who is likely to reuse things that others have done more frequently? That's the person to hold up as an example to the rest of the organization. Who is the person who is going to say, let's build a community and collaborate together through fusion teams? Let's work with the business. Don't just push them aside. And those are the people that you will promote, and those are the habits that you will build. And then the third practical thing that you can do is target the right technologies. I gave you some to think about. Things like automation, things like the composable architecture, things like prepackaged business capabilities. Target the right things to get the right things done, right? So start narrowing down your list of what technologies you will be using, not expanding it continually. I'm not saying settle on something forever. I am saying come up with a list of the composability technologies that you think are the most critical to your organization. And once you come up with that list, make sure that you have the right training on it and the right focus, and you're following the habits built around its use. If you can do that, you will make a lot of progress on composability. And you won't be talking about it 5 years from now saying, oh, it never worked, because it can work. And if it does work, you'll be more agile. You'll be more composable, and you'll definitely be more resilient. Thank you very much for listening, and enjoy the rest of your day.